Hey, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
All is well, all is well. Thank you again. I really appreciate your patience. Apologize again about the mishap before. It was an unexpected, technical difficulty, but I'm in the cafe now, so we should be good.
Power should be no issue.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. So I'm gonna take it from the top. For the viewers who may not recognize you, let them know who you are, and definitely where you from.
Yeah, I'm Renaud Wiers, and I'm from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Actually, Haarlem, close to Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And working at University of Amsterdam. And I just completed, my book was just published on addiction and choice. Here it is.
Wow. Okay. Okay. We had kind of touched on this before, but I'll go over it again. I was saying last time that I'm a world traveler. I've been to 70 countries all around the world, but the very first place that I went to was Amsterdam. So that's always been a very, very special place for me. You know, that one experience, that one trip that I took really, changed my life. I would be a totally different person if I never made that trip to Amsterdam.
Wow, it sounds like you have to tell a story here.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I made some real good friends. I'm still in touch with them. I've been there at least 4 or 5 times. But I want to hear more about the book. If you could tell me, what inspired you to even, put that project together?
Yeah, so I've basically been working in addiction research for the past that's 30 years now, starting PhD. And well, so um, basically, it all goes down to the observation: how can somebody knowingly um, take an addictive substance or perform addictive behaviors like gambling while realizing that this is actually in the long term a bad thing to do. And um, this goes back to Plato, the same question. Of course, then it was not about addiction, but more in general. Are people able to do things they know are bad for them? Or are we always prone to choose whatever is, according to us, the best choice? So he was already debating this. And for example, Aristotle had a different perspective. And all of this comes back in today's discussions about addiction, where some people in the biomedical sphere have defined it as a chronic brain disease. So that is one side. And they oppose that to the other side, which was the old moral perspective, where basically you're a moral failure if you become addicted. Now, my argument is basically it's in almost all of the cases, it's neither. It's neither a chronic brain disease nor moral failure. And that is, there is still some choice left. And the chronic brain disease is often equated to the idea that people lose their free will. But that's a very black and white perspective because people with addiction still have choice left. However, the choice has gotten biased. So if you're a smoker, you tend to see signs of cigarettes everywhere. Same with marijuana, alcohol, opioids, etc. So your choice is not anymore what used to be before you got addicted. But in a way, that is not very different from what other people have with other choices they make that might also not be good for them, and they know it. With cigarette smoking, almost every smoker knows that this will reduce your life expectancy dramatically. It's one of the most lethal addictions. Still, many people continue to smoke. So, how can this be that we do these things? That is the type of questions I try to tackle from different perspectives, from neurobiology. So, where does this uh, chronic brain disease story come from? Of course, there are changes in the brain as people get addicted. So what are these changes? Do they prove it's a chronic brain disease? I would argue in most cases it's not the case, because luckily people can eventually change. Most people successfully do change. The history, of course, psychology, this is the area where I did most of the research. And then with this alternative, so neither a chronic brain disease nor moral failure, the alternative is biased choice. And what I did with my fellow researchers in my lab is develop methods to help people overcome this biased choice in addictions. And we've shown that that can actually help a group of people with addictions to overcome their addiction, but only when it's added to regular therapy. So that's a real
Oh, okay.
nutshell.
That's definitely interesting. I'm sure that's something that almost everyone can relate to, if not from their own experience, but from family and friends. So I wanted to kind of ask you about that. Does genetics have anything to do with it? Family history, like say if your father gambled, does that mean you're more likely to become addicted to gambling, or how do you
Yeah.
feel about that?
Yeah. So there's also indeed a chapter on genetics. And also, this I think is really interesting. This goes back also to some of the research I did already before the turn of the century as part of my PhD on children with an alcohol dependent parent, because they have a bigger chance to also develop an addiction themselves. However, you also see a relatively large proportion of children who then don't go drinking at all. And this is actually a very interesting thing that relates to, say, a unique human ability, and that is foresight. So we have the ability um, to foresee the results of our actions. Of course, many animals have that too, but then with a very short time window. So as soon as the time window gets a bit bigger, then basically it's only humans who have some capacity to see longer term consequences. Um, and so this is actually also one of the things where some of the animal research can be interesting in basic motivational mechanisms, what changes in the brain. But this part where we have the ability to foresee what would eventually happen if we keep on going like this, or if we make a change, that is something that you can't really model well in animal models. Anyway, so that long-term perspective taking, foresight, episodic future thinking, it's also called, that is really a crucial ability here that people can use to change or even to prevent them from starting to drink. So when it comes to the genetics, there's basically one part of, say, the genetic influence. It's thousands of genes that are involved with all very tiny little changes in the chances someone has to develop an addiction. So part of this is substance specific. So for example, if you digest alcohol very well, then the chances that you develop a problem with drinking, it's much higher than someone who doesn't digest alcohol well. Yeah, so you have a proportion, especially people with Asian background who really don't digest alcohol well. This is directly related to some genes. Well, then the chances that you develop an alcohol problem are very slim, because it's obvious it's a toxin right away. So you get a flush reaction, red head, you feel sick. So why would you ever do that again? The opposite is also true, and that is that people who really digest it well, so they have very few of the direct negative consequences and a lot of the high, they have a higher risk. And that is specific to alcohol. That would not predict that they will become gamblers or something like that. And the same with nicotine. There are some nicotine receptors, so one variety makes you more prone to cigarette smoking, or actually more precisely to have a hard time to quit cigarette smoking than the other variety. But then there are also personality traits that are related to a more general risk for addiction. And impulsivity is one, sensation seeking. So if you score high on these, and teenagers typically score high, then that increases the risk of developing substance use problems. There's also a different set of personality characteristics, and that is that you have a lot of negative feelings, prone to anxiety, depression. Typically, kids who score high on these characteristics are not the easy or the early folks to take addiction up. It's risky, it's scary, so you don't start. However, especially for substances that most people in your own social circles use, at some point, most kids do try alcohol or cannabis. Then, once they start noticing that it might actually alleviate some of their negative feelings, of course, they are also at increased risk. So it's really very different routes. And these traits are partly influenced by genetic factors, but also partly by other factors in your early rearing environment, in your neighborhood. We know, for example, poverty has an effect. So it's really not only genetics, but it's really this mix of some traits, genetic traits with early development that place people at risk. But then the interesting part for the foresight, say, is that, if you would have rats with a high genetic risk for addiction, then obviously many of these rats get addicted if you give them the chance to take the substances. With people, you also have those who kind of foresee that, my father was having alcohol problems, my grandfather, so maybe I just should not start drinking. And this is really a very different thing where the higher order psychological processes influence our behavior rather than just how we react to a substance or something.
Wow, that's very powerful information, man. So many people could utilize that because, like you said, so many different factors from your family, your genetics, your environment, your race, that could play a part into you ultimately becoming addicted. I could speak for myself. Like my dad, he used to drink a lot, and it just terrified me. So I never wanted to even try it. But I got
Exactly.
siblings, and like some of them is the opposite. They follow right into that, and it's like
Right.
even
Exactly.
when I got older, I experimented. I drink like a little bit of it. I'm like, man, I can't do it.
Right. Yeah. No. So
Nah,
that's
uh,
yeah. That's exactly what it's all about, right? So it's not a simple story. There's clearly genetic factors that play a role. There's no doubt about it. But that doesn't mean that someone with a higher risk, because, for example, your father and grandfather had alcohol problems, that you're prone to be addicted. No, it just means you have a bit higher chance. But if you are aware of this and you can actually mitigate this, you might also turn it to something totally different. And that is really also what is an important part, is also uh, with people who are vulnerable, how you can help them to develop a different path, basically. And there, what we see is really that there are important people in early life that help. It can be a coach of a sporting team, or so, just right after the Olympics now, of course. Um, some teacher, typically those children who had a difficult background but still came out in a very positive trajectory almost invariably can mention someone who was really an important figure for them. And if it wasn't in their own family, it could be some, teacher, coach, whatever. So that is an important aspect as well.
okay, okay. Now, one more question about the book. I know you got several decades in this field of experience, but how long did it actually take you to complete this project?
Yeah, so I did it next to my work as a professor in university. And it was a bit of my COVID baby. So suddenly there was less travel, more working at home. I spent 2 summer holidays on writing it and made a plan on the chapters, and then basically try to tell the story more. So not because I write a lot in English, of course, for the scientific papers, but here I initially wrote it in Dutch, my mother tongue, to more tell it to the neighbor or something, the story, and also with some personal stories from my life, and the different topics, why, what the story is behind the chronic brain disease, what the problems are with that model, what the alternative is, all these things, but in a kind of a hopefully understandable way, with some of the historic and philosophical background as well. And then only after the Dutch version was published, I made the English version, but then also tried to, with help of a lot of native speakers, to tell a story rather than have a purely scientific book.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes it more relatable. Now, I can ask you this: when did you develop this passion for psychology? Was this something that you were always into? Did you have family members that were educators and psychologists, or?
No, totally not. And it was really a search for me because um, in high school I got more and more interested in, yeah, actually both arts, literature on the one hand, and on the other hand, science. And then on the science side, mostly into what is this thing, a mind, and how can it develop from the brain. But then it was not so clear what you should study to study that. So I talk with different people, get all sorts of different advices. And you can study biology, but maybe in the brain it's basically all biochemistry. So maybe you should go to biochemistry. But the questions are more philosophy, basically philosophy of mind, or maybe psychology. But I didn't really know what psychology was really. Anyway, so I talk with people, and then in the end, some people said, well, maybe it has all these different aspects. Maybe just simply start with the most difficult part that you're unlikely to read about in the evening. So that's chemistry. So I started with chemistry. But then within chemistry, they had the same reasoning. So they said, yeah, this chemistry is easy. But basically, all I did was math and physics, which I could do, but it was very far away from what really drove me to study in the first place. So after 1 year of chemistry, um, I decided to not pursue that road, but I wasn't still clear what I wanted to, which would be the right road in. So then I traveled for a year, actually started fiction writing also, and I also published a book on short stories after that. And then when I came back, I had decided, well, let's do philosophy. I read quite some philosophy then. But then other people, including uh, my dad, who's a doctor actually, said, well, Dan, you know, maybe better go to psychology because at least you can do research if it's not in the biochemistry field, but So then I did psychology and philosophy next to each other. And in the end, he was right. I did like the fact that in psychology, you can actually empirically address the questions that are often philosophical in nature. So then I pursued in psychology and did my PhD on risk factors for addiction, and then uh, went back to what my original interest was, also like conscious, unconscious mechanisms, and applied those into addiction. And from that, we derived new training methods to help people with addictions to overcome their biased choices that keep on driving them to their addiction, even though they are rationally and consciously aware that there are problems with these choices. So that's kind of a nutshell how I got into there. But then in the COVID times, it was also kind of fun to read up what happened in philosophy here. Of course, you can't read everything, but I read some of the relevant philosophy in my psychology. Of course, you get lots of neuroscience also, but still there's lots going on there. Read up on those new developments, and then try to coherently summarize the different perspectives and how we can integrate everything in this notion that addiction is really about biased choice. And then that also brings questions. We all face biased choice, right? So maybe we're not addicted to a substance, but then we might be aware that there's climate change going on. It's 35 degrees here right now. It's kind of crazy in the Netherlands if you look at how north we are. So what can we do about that? And then answers are very simple. One of the easiest things you can do is not eat meat, not to minimize on fossil fuels, not fly, etc. But how do you get all of these choices into your life? So in a way, we all face biased choice. And actually one of the triggers on this perspective was also a documentary maker who phoned me up and asked me if it could be the case that she was meat addicted. I said, meat addicted? Is this some joke or so? And she said, no. I'm totally convinced because of climate change that I should not eat meat anymore. And then I passed the butcher and I smell this chicken on the roasted chicken. And there we go, it's craving. So it is. I mean, I'm not saying it's the exact same thing as a heroin addict who has not had heroin for 24 hours, but it's in the same sphere. It's all about realizing in the long term, this is not the good thing to do, but there is, this desire to still do it for short-term gains. So how can you overcome these type of biases? I think it's very relevant for people with addictions, but in a way for all of us, for the future of the planet. The Center for Urban Mental Health is a truly interdisciplinary center where 3 faculties collaborate. So I'm in psychology, and that is part of a bigger social and behavioral sciences faculty. And then there's also the medicine faculty with psychiatry, but also with social medicine. And there is the hard sciences with neurobiology, but also with people on modeling and complexity science. So we have all these different angles, and we steer toward trying to understand and then also help people with mental health problems in urban areas. Why the urban part? Well, already more than half of the people on the earth live in urban areas, and this is expected to grow to 2/3 in the next decades. What you also see is that in urban areas, mental health problems are more prevalent than in rural areas, especially the big 3. So that is addictions and also anxieties and depression-related problems. So basically what we look at with also this complexity science and modeling is try to understand how exactly does this work, because we now talked also for addiction mostly about processes within the individual, like genetics, how you react to a substance, etc. But we also know that in some areas there are more addictions or more depression, for example, and that if you are from a minority group and you face a lot of discrimination, well, clearly this is related to increased mental health problems. So it's, the genes or the neurobiology is not per definition the best level of description to look at this type of problems. So we also look at how things in an area, how perceived discrimination, poverty, those type of variables impact mental health, and then also how we could do something about it. That was a little break there. So how these impact mental health, and also if we can find novel ways to do something about it, where a general rule is that in many urban areas, and not only looking at the, our own rich part of the world, but also other parts of the world, there's simply not enough people with mental health licenses like psychiatrists, clinical psychologists to help every individual. So you want to look at interventions that can be scaled up. So, for example, we work with chatbots that might help many more people to quit smoking, for example. Or my colleague has worked on an intervention where you basically teach volunteers how to help someone else with a depression. So then, rather than the psychiatrist helping a depressed person in the city, it could be a neighbor who wants to invest in this. So those type of other interventions are also aim of our study. So it's on the one hand describing how exactly what the mechanisms are, why there are more mental health problems in urban areas, whether that's Amsterdam, New Delhi, whatever. And second, if we can use some of that knowledge to create novel interventions to help people overcome these mental health problems.
Okay, okay. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Man, I'm still processing a lot of the information that you're sharing. It could be definitely utilized by people all over the world. Now, you had spoke about a documentary earlier. Have you ever thought about creating a documentary yourself? You know, based upon the work and the research that you have done.
A documentary. Well, we have like a mini documentary has been made on the Center for Urban Mental Health. That is also on the website. Maybe you can share that. The Center for Urban Mental Health. And on the new interventions that we developed, there was also some documentary made, but that's in Dutch. So, but yeah, I mean, if you have an idea for a documentary on these topics and on the book, I'd be happy to participate, of course. Yes, thanks a lot. And I'll share the link to the book and to the Center for Urban Mental Health. And thanks for the interest and lots of luck with the program.
Oh yeah, thank you again. All right, until next time.
Thank you. Bye.